All right, ladies and gentlemen, our next speaker for the day is Dr. Steve Wheeler. Well, ladies and gentlemen, writer, speaker, and a broadcaster. Dr. Steve has worked for 5 years in Educational Technology Department at the College of St. Mark and St. John, a teacher training college in Plymouth. Well, Steve is actively invited to speak in conferences and events worldwide, usually one of his research interests, which includes e-learning, mobile learning, distance education, and the psychology of learning. Ladies and gentlemen, experienced learning innovation consultant with demonstrated history of working in all sectors of education, including learning and development. Let's go ahead and welcome him on board.
Good morning. Hello and salam alaikum. Marhaba. Nice to be here actually with you virtually today from my studio here in Plymouth in England. It's actually a lovely place, Qatar. I've been there before. I've spoken on the very stage that you're sat in front right now many years ago. And I think when I spoke there last time, there was an earthquake, which I hope will not happen today. But I'm quite familiar with Qatar. So thank you very much for inviting me to speak at your event today. My subject today is digital literacies for lifelong learning. And I mentioned lifelong learning because we are all in education together, whatever our age. I have a granddaughter who's 6 months old now. She is learning constantly. My father is 93, he's still learning. There's a whole lot of generations of learning together. I have a very brief time to try and present this for you. So let me just start by saying that I speak in lots of different places. This is a blog post that I wrote several years ago where I was invited to go and speak in the University of Antarctica, of all places. And my blog recently has just topped 10 million views. So you can go and check that out. It's called Life in the Freezer. And that was my invitation down there for 3 days to speak to a whole load of researchers and distance educators in Antarctica. But really what I want to talk to you about is this picture here, which I think you'll find interesting for a number of reasons. Obviously, it doesn't look like it should do because it should be switched, shouldn't it, in our imagination. But there are lots of theories about how young people and older people use technologies. There's this natives and immigrants theory by Mark Prensky, which I have to say, he's refuted that now, and so have we. It's false. It's about age, and age doesn't really figure in this. What we're looking here at really is context, and there's a better theory, I think, now, digital residents and visitors, which talks about the context. If we are a digital resident, we are habituated into the use of a technology, and we're very familiar with it, and we can use it, leverage it, harness its power. Whereas if we're a visitor, we are not very familiar with that technology. So I'd like us to think about our digital literacies as being familiar with the technologies, and I will expand on that. This is a graph from maybe about 10 years ago, talking about the different types of users. And you'll find that almost half of us are basic users in most technologies. So it's not about age, it's about context. And I'm going to rush through this. This is a picture that I took at Qatar Foundation several years ago of 2 students. And what are they doing? Well, the old traditional literacies, which we teach still in schools today and which will not be replaced, are things like reading, writing, speaking, listening. But there are other literacies as well that are emerging because of new technologies, such as the media, the visual, and the critical literacies. But the one I want to focus on the most is digital literacies, because it overarches all of these. It actually, it influences all of them, because we are using technology increasingly to communicate both inside the class and outside of the class. So these literacies will not be replaced, they will be supplemented by digital literacies. And I also want to point out to you that actually we identify through our technologies now, particularly younger people, but also older people, we identify through our technologies. We become part of a tribe, if you like, a digital tribe, which has many different clans within it. And we mediate our communication, and that in that way we get what Pierre Bourdieu would call a cultural capital, but I would like to call it a digital cultural capital. And that cultural capital allows us to participate in a massive architecture which is spanning the globe, both above the and below the atmosphere, with satellites and with other communications technologies. We call this Learning 2.0. It's a new type of learning which is influenced by technologies and allows us to do things we couldn't do before. There are new tools and new collaborating technologies. There's a voting type technology we can use. There are tagging tools which allow us to identify specific targets. Networking has never been so easy. Sharing our content has never been so easy. And because of that, we see the proliferation of user-generated content. And this is a new way that learners are learning, both inside and outside universities, colleges, and schools. There's lots of evidence of this out there. We see communities of learning forming that were never able to form before, and we need digital literacies to navigate and translate that into our understanding. So if you can imagine the man standing on the left next to the yellow table, he's facing away from it, looking in the left direction there. If you can imagine, he's connected to 3 other people via a social media tool. That's small. That's okay. You can talk to 3 other people. But it's exponential because each of those people is also connected to other people. And ultimately, eventually, you have a professional learning network which you can tap into, and you can get, I suppose, considered expert information back instantly or within a few minutes from people all over the world who are interested in the same things as you. And this is another thing we need to learn. We need to learn how to navigate these tools, but we also need to know how to connect to the right people that will benefit our learning. So what we do in effect is we crowdsource our knowledge. We're not just looking at knowledge from books these days or from the lecturer or the expert in the room. We're also looking for experts all over the world. And we're building that professional learning network to help us to learn through asking questions and dialogue and through discourse. And I think this is a huge set of new skills that we're having to develop. We store our knowledge with our friends, says Karen Stevenson, which I think is a really interesting idea. We have the idea that we don't need to remember everything anymore. We just need to know where it is and then find it when we need it. And we call this connectivism. This is from the theory of George Siemens and Stephen Downes. We also have the idea of pedagogy, which is Cornelian Danoff, the idea that everybody is learning from each other now. And because we're learning from each other, the power differentials become equalized. And finally, we have hertagogy, which is the self-determined type of learning theory, which has been developed by Hayes and Kenyon in Australia. And these 3 theories are new theories for the digital age. And I urge you to, I encourage you to look them up and pursue them, because these theories actually, I think, explain a lot of what is happening both inside and outside the classroom when children and young people and also older people like myself use technology to learn these days. And I'm rattling through this very quickly, so I hope there's going to be some good questions at the end that you're going to come up with. I'm sure there will be, where you can either challenge or ask for more depth. I'm really skimming over this at the moment. This is a huge topic which would require probably a couple of hours to explain in more detail, but we haven't got that time. What we do have is new learners, and John Waters, back about 10 years ago, said this is what they look like, this is what they do. Firstly, they're more self-directed. The young people coming into your classroom now were born in this century. Think about that. If you're under 21, you were born in this century. You don't really know about the last century other than through history books, whereas most of us were born in the last century and were educated in the last century. The younger people today are better equipped because they have better technologies than we had when we were at school. They're more reliant on feedback from their peers and they're more inclined to collaborate. But here's the big one. They become their own modes of production, their own nodes of production. They share their own content more regularly. They do selfies, but they also do deeper things like reflecting on their practice through blogs, podcasts, videos, and so on. So there's a lot of things going on out there which are technology driven. And I show my students this, I say to them, look, what's wrong with this? And I swear to you, 1 or 2 of them once said to me, is it 70%? And I had to point out to them, look, you know, this is a picture of Thomas Edison. He was born and died before the internet was even created. He was a technologist, but if he had have been alive in the internet, maybe he would have said something like this, but this is false. So you need to be able to check your facts. You need to be able to find what the truth is and measure that against what the lies are on the internet, because there are many of them. In that case, learners need these new digital literacies. I was listening to a TV program, a broadcast from BBC News yesterday, talking about the hacking that's happening to major industrial companies now around the world, and also to infrastructures and to utility companies, and how dangerous that is. And I thought, actually, one of the digital literacies now is safety. It's protection, privacy and protection of your data, because data is so valuable now. It can be traded. It can be traded by people like Amazon and by Google and by Facebook, because they know how valuable your personal data is. So we need to be able to understand how to protect ourselves, and how to protect the companies and the organizations and the universities that we are engaged in working for. So there's a whole range of issues around digital literacy that cover safety and protection of data. And I'm going to rush through some of those now for you. I produced a map several years ago which shows 9 of what I consider to be the most important digital literacies. And I'm going to leave these slides with the organizers so that you can have a copy of this. These are free to anyone who wants to use them. If you notice at the bottom right-hand corner, I've got the Creative Commons license down there. That's another literacy that allows you to be able to share freely your content and to be able to give it away for free, but keep the ownership of it, because people who use this, I expect them to attribute it back to me, the source, and so on. So here are 9, and I just want to highlight some of the issues here. One is that there is a social dimension. There's an outward-facing dimension when you're sharing content, when you're socially networking, when you're presenting yourself like I'm doing now on video. There's an outward-facing dimension, but there's also a personal dimension as well, where you can maintain your privacy and manage your identity, manage your brand, if you like. Everyone has a personal brand. And these are huge concepts which are emerging quite rapidly into the EdTech world, and have been for several years. And finally, there's a knowledge management and decision-making dimension here, where you have the ability to filter content and navigate that content and create it and share it. But the one I want to point out to you that I think is probably the most vital one of the lot at the moment is transliteracy. And transliteracy really is I call it the king of all the digital literacies, because it's so important. Let me show you why. Transliteracy, and I'll read this out to you. It's the ability to read, write, and interact across a range of platforms, tools, and media. From everything from semiotics, signing, through to orality, speaking, listening, and through to handwriting and digital social networks. There's a whole range of things. So you should be able to present yourself equally well on video as you can on the telephone, as you can on text, as you can through podcast or blogging or writing. These are all media transliteracies, which I think all students and teachers need to be able to develop, because we never know, do we, what's going to hit the world. This pandemic took us all by surprise. We've all had to learn how to teach at a distance, remotely, through these kind of technologies, and lots of people are still struggling to come up with the nuances, understand the nuances and the complexities of all of this. So it's a really difficult transition, but we should all be able to do it, because pedagogy is pedagogy regardless of the technology, and pedagogy should come first. We should think about the affordances of the technology and how we can leverage them to support the pedagogy that we can do, whatever that pedagogy is, whatever that teaching and learning method is. So let me just outline what the digital literacies are for you. Sorry, how they work. They're not skills, they're more than skills. A skill is when you learn something. So I learned to drive in the UK over here, and over here we drive on the left side of the road, and we sit on the right hand side of the car. I'm doing it in reverse for you. Because we're doing that, we learn how to do that, and we learn through our tests, and we learn through practice, and eventually, of course, we get to the point when we become competent, and then we can drive on our own. And many's the time I have driven into work and not even realized that I'm driving. I've forgotten the journey because it's automatic. It's subconscious. It becomes a depth of skill. But when I went to America to work, I got into a car which had a left side drive, and I was driving on the right side of the road, and all the signs were different. And I thought, hang on a sec. And I had to readjust. I had to become literate in the new culture in which I was being immersed within. And I would suggest to you that actually digital learning environments are still quite alien to a lot of us. Even though we use computers every day, we use smartphones every day, and maybe we're on social media every day, there are certain nuances that are still difficult for us. So my father, for instance, who is 93 now, when he was 88, I introduced him to Facebook. And he got onto Facebook and found out that all his grandchildren were on Facebook, and they were all in their teens at the time. And my father, sorry, spoke to them all and shared pictures with them and learned how to use the system. But his elderly sister died suddenly in the night, and he was quite upset by this. And he told everyone in the morning, he said, your auntie has died, your great aunt has died in the night. She lived a wonderful life, and I will miss her a lot. Her funeral will be arranged soon. LOL. And LOL, of course, for him means lots of love. But for my children, the teenagers, it means laughing out loud. It's a completely different meaning. And they were really upset by this, and they had to talk to him about it and say, look, Dad, Granddad, you cannot use LOL. It means a different thing to us. So there's a generational divide here that we notice happening in the way languages are spoken across the internet, and in the way abbreviations and even things like emojis, emoticons are being used as well. So there's a whole range of differences that we have to be aware of. And if we're ever going to reach mastery or fluency, we need to be aware of these literacies and how they can be acquired, how they can be practiced. This is a picture I took when I was last in Qatar. We did some sand duning, and I remember taking pictures out of the window. And I remember, actually, I'm on the wrong side of the car here. It was quite disorienting, but I saw a lot of Qatar that way, a lot of the desert anyway. So I'm sure you're familiar with sand duning. It's quite exhilarating, isn't it? So back to life in the freezer. Now, I mentioned to you earlier on that I went to the University of Antarctica, and you see the link down here in the middle, the hyperlink to the university, and there's lots of things down there that you can see on that site. And I'm sure some of you have already checked this out because you've thought, hang on a sec, is there actually a University of Antarctica? Well, I'll point you out to the date at the top left corner, which is April the 1st. And this was an experiment I did on April the 1st, which is April Fool's Day. And I put this blog post up, and it was read by, I don't know how many thousand people. And many of them, professors included, emailed me and said, Steve, I'd like to go to the University of Antarctica. How do I get an invitation? And I left it for a few days, and then I pointed out to them that actually this is a complete fake. I mean, postgraduate students, those are penguins. There's a whole load of clues in there about how this is absolutely fake. But people trusted it because they trust me as an academic, and it was on my site. So therefore they were fooled. And I did that for a reason. I did that to point out to people that you should never believe everything you see on the internet. You should always check everything out. This is back to the critical literacy we mentioned earlier on. So I think this is something we need to teach all of our students, but we also need to adopt it and practice it ourselves. I've got a few minutes left to wrap this up. So let me just finish with a few other ideas for you. This is Mark Federman's idea of the 4 C's. Now, we know the 3 R's, reading, writing, and arithmetic. The 4 C's, according to Mark Federman, again, superimpose on that. They don't replace them. So there's connection. How do we connect to knowledge? How do we connect to experts? How do we connect to peers within our study group, and so on? This is what MOOCs are all about. Massive open online courses actually leverage the power of the connection. And I mentioned connectivism earlier on, which is a new and emerging theory that tries to explain this. But on top of connection, we've got context. How do we provide the context through which we're learning? How do we provide that for our students? It's about the wrapper, I think. It's about how we identify that source and how we put it into the context of their learning. It's about situated learning, I think. Then there's how to navigate complexity. How do we navigate the complexity of this? Again, there's a set of skills involved in that. And finally, we need to make meaning out of it. So the connotation, we need to make meaning from what we're learning and then apply it back downwards through the complexity, the context and the connections again. So that's a really nice little model, I think, to help us to understand the whole context of how we learn in the new economy, the new environment, learning 2.0, as we call it. I'm going to stop there, I think, and just give you my details. You find me on Twitter as Steve Wheeler. That's my blog there, steve-wheeler.co.uk. And that's my professional blog above it, steve-wheeler.net. And there's my email there as well if you want to get me on that. And I'll just finish by saying that it's been great to be with you virtually. But it would be much better if we were all together in one place. That's the richness of communication, where you can see people's body language and you can shake hands, you can share a coffee, and you can exchange ideas and so on in a much more, I suppose, intimate environment. But this is mediated communication, where there's reduced social cues. We have to have another digital literacy that will help us to interpret that as well. So with that, I say thank you very much. And I think that's 20 minutes. Okay, now I believe that I can go into chat and have a look at any questions. So how can the education institutes invest in upskilling teachers, which will increase their efficiency in online teaching? What are the strengths and weaknesses of intercultural digital literacies? Well, I think I've tried to touch on that briefly. I think one of the weaknesses is language. We have a problem with language. Even within the language, we have generational differences. We have nuances which we have to interpret. And I think the ability to be able to reduce text down, what we call squeeze text, Victoria Carrington called it that many years ago, the ability to actually, because of SMS texting, because it's expensive still, we have to squeeze text down. And so we do a lot of abbreviations. And abbreviations to one person means something different to another person. I mentioned LOL, for instance. There are so many others as well where we can have confusion. But I think we have to persevere. We have to put our students into situations where they can learn within context. And I mean by that, what we would call in the learning and development industry, we would call it learning transfer. I think that people like Jean Lave and Etienne Wenger call it situated learning or cognitive cognitive positioning. And the whole idea behind that is that you learn something and then apply it immediately. It's learning on the job, if you like. And I think that is one of the strengths of this that we can invest within. That's the best way, I think, to upskill teachers, is to put them in a situation where they have to adapt quickly, teach them some skills, and then get them to use them immediately, because it's the immediacy that actually makes the difference, I think. Are there any other questions that anyone wants to pose, or shall I hand back to Samira? No? I think one of the important literacies when you're actually speaking like this is to have confidence that there are actually people out there watching you. And I'm not sure whether there is anybody out there watching me now that I see that there's only one question. But I have to have faith in that and believe that you're actually there and you can hear me and that you will connect with me later on if you're not able to ask questions right now. But oh, here we go. How can the education institutions invest in? Oh, that's the same one. We've just answered that question, haven't we? But how about you? What do you think? What are your methods, or what would be your methods of upskilling if you're training teachers, for instance, which I've been doing for the last 20 years, 25 years, training teachers, how do you prepare them for an uncertain future? How do you get them to use technologies in new and innovative ways? What would be your ideas there? That would be maybe an interesting debate for later on. It's a question I often pose to my own professional network, and I get these questions back from them as well. You know, how can we do these kind of things? Well, there are many, many ways of doing it, and I'm sure it's limited only by our own creativity. Now, I could keep talking into the ether here, but I think maybe I'll hand back to Samira. Did you have any questions for me that you wanted to ask, or any other questions that came up?
It was a pleasure having you on our platform. Thank you for coming and sharing insights. I'm sure everybody is delighted to have you on board and to listen to your session. Thank you so much once again.